In 1994, 3 teenagers were convicted of brutally killing 3 8-year-old boys in a satanic ritual, despite the lack of physical evidence. One was sentenced to death, while the others were given life sentences. Documentaries have been made regarding the case, which had cast doubt on the trio's guilt. Several celebrities have spoken out in support of the 3 men. Some have even helped fund a legal team to fight the guilty verdicts. In 2007, new forensic tests showed that there was no DNA evidence that linked the West Memphis Three, as they are collectively called, to the murders. In 2010, a hearing was ordered by the Arkansas Supreme Court to determine if the teenagers, now men, deserved a new trial. But before anything could be decided, the West Memphis Three agreed to the Alford plea and were released for time served. The Alford plea, in layman's terms, is when the defendant acknowledges that the current evidence will likely result in a guilty verdict, so he will plead guilty to get a lesser sentence while still maintaining his innocence. Despite getting released from prison, the West Memphis Three were not exonerated. In the eyes of the law, they are guilty. As a result, there is no new investigation into the murders. It is up to the 3 men to clear their names. The question we have before us now is, what would it take to solve this case? How likely is it that the real murderer or murderers will be found? In this episode, we'll take a look at the murders, the current evidence, and the opinions of experts to find out what would it take to finally unravel this mystery. On the afternoon of May 5, 1993, 3 8-year-old boys, Christopher Byers, Michael Moore, and Stevie Branch, went bike riding around their hometown of West Memphis, Arkansas. They were best friends, went to the same school, and were part of a Cub Scout troop. So their parents trusted that they were responsible enough to go around the neighborhood unsupervised. Unfortunately, the kids failed to return home that night. Around 8 p.m., John Mark Byers, Christopher's stepfather, reported his son missing to the West Memphis Police Department. They had last seen their son around 5:30 p.m. in the yard. Within the next hour and a half, the police received 2 more calls. Dana Moore stated that she had last seen her son Michael around 6 p.m. He was biking with his friends. He didn't come home for dinner. Pamela Hobbs, Stevie's mom, stated that she hadn't seen her son since he left for school. 3 neighbors reported seeing the children playing together around 6:30 p.m. They also saw Terry Hobbs, Stevie's stepfather, telling the children to come home. But one witness, Carlos Seals, stated something different. He was in junior high school at the time. According to his statement, Seals had seen the 3 children on their bikes around 5:30 or 6 p.m. He said that they were all carrying sleeping bags and they told him that they were going camping in the woods. A search was conducted in the 4-acre woods near Interstate 40 called Robin Hood Hills, where the neighborhood kids would sometimes go to play. They found nothing. The following afternoon at 1:30 p.m., the bodies of the 3 boys were found in a drainage ditch in Robin Hood Hills. All 3 had their clothes stripped off. Their clothes and bicycles were found strewn across the crime scene. They were hog-tied with their shoelaces, and they had multiple injuries on their bodies. It must be noted that there were many problems with how the police handled the crime scene. They removed the bodies from the water and placed them on the adjacent embankment before the coroner arrived. This not only might have disturbed any physical evidence in the area, it also could have contaminated the scene. In addition, it wasn't until 3:58 p.m. that the police called the coroner. By the time he arrived, there was already fly larvae present in the nostrils and eyes of the victims. In addition, luminol tests weren't performed until 6 days later. According to forensic pathologist Frank J. Peretti, Christopher died of multiple injuries, while Michael and Steve died of multiple injuries with drowning, and they died between 1 and 5 a.m. It didn't take long for rumors to spread that the boys were killed in a satanic ritual. Many in the community had only 3 culprits in mind, including the police. Damian Eccles, an 18-year-old teen who always wore black, listened to Metallica, and practiced Wicca. Jason Baldwin, Damien's friend, who was 16 years old and an artist who tended to prefer dark subjects, and Jessie Miss Kelly, a 17-year-old misfit with an IQ of 73. It only took a day after the discovery of the bodies for the police to start focusing their investigation onto Damien Eccles and his friend Jason Baldwin, especially since Damien had a history of psychiatric problems. He was a dropout, and he had a record for shoplifting and vandalism. Many in the community had the same view. According to a high school teacher, Jim Ferguson, Damien was like some wacko cult member. In the notes taken by the police, it was written that Eccles likes to read books by Stephen King and has evil across his left knuckles. Jason Baldwin was also reported to have the same inked on his left knuckles. Aside from questioning Damien and Jason, the police also administered a polygraph test to Damien. According to them, Damien had been untruthful and, according to the polygraph, was involved in the murders. Damien's mother, Pam, provided him with an alibi that night, but the police were still convinced that he was involved in the murder. An amateur sleuth who was conducting her own investigation, Vicky Hutchinson, told the police that she had evidence that Damien and Jessie were involved in cult activities. She stated that she had attended a witches' meeting with Damien and Jessie. Her 8-year-old son, Aaron, even told the police that he often went to woods in Robin Hood Hills with the 3 boys. They would sometimes see 5 men sitting in a circle, singing songs to the devil and doing what men and ladies do. A few days after that interview, Aaron's testimony would change to seeing a group of Satan worshippers to actually witnessing the murders. The defense was able to discover later from the Hutchinsons' neighbors that Aaron was at the trailer park at the time of the murders, not in the woods as he had told the police. Convinced by Hutchinson's investigation as well as her polygraph test results, the police started questioning Jessie. They tell him that there's a $35,000 reward for information that would lead to a conviction. He could receive that money if he helped them out. While he initially denied murdering the kids, after 12 hours of harsh questioning and scare tactics without the presence of a lawyer or his parents, Jessie confessed that he, Damien, and Jason had done the deed. Note that only 46 minutes of his interview was taped. However, his confession was riddled with inconsistencies. He stated that they had murdered the kids during the daytime. He also stated that they had tied up the kids with rope. The police worked with him to get his story to match the known facts of the case before they started to tape his confession. Based on this confession, search warrants were issued for the homes of Damien, Jason, and Jessie. They were also charged with 3 counts of capital murder. Damien and Jason were tried together, while Jessie was tried separately. Despite the fact that Jessie's confession was obtained through coercion, Judge Burnett allowed it to be introduced in the trial, while the prosecution explained the inconsistencies as Jessie's confused state. Moreover, the teenagers were tried as adults instead of juveniles. Throughout the trial, the evidence presented by the prosecution was mostly circumstantial. There was no physical evidence and no eyewitnesses. The defense did present some witnesses that stated that they saw Damien around 9:15 to 9:30 p.m. on the night of the murders near the crime scene. He was reportedly wearing muddy clothes. However, according to one of the witnesses, Narlene Hollingsworth, Damien was walking with his girlfriend, who, coincidentally, was also wearing muddy clothes. One of the witnesses, Ricky Hollingsworth Sr., could only say that he saw 2 people, but he couldn't identify who they were. Moreover, some of them couldn't even be sure whether they saw the 2 on the night of the 5th or some other night. According to the prosecution, they might have mistaken Jason for Damien because both had long hair and a slight build. However, Narlene was adamant about what she saw. After all, they were very familiar with her because they were relatives. If that wasn't confusing enough, her credibility was also in question. Some of Narlene's own relatives reported that she had a tendency to exaggerate. In addition, her own son, Anthony, was one of the witnesses. And he himself had been previously arrested for unlawful carnal knowledge with a minor, a fact that was not revealed in court because it was considered irrelevant to the case. Jesse, as mentioned previously, recanted his confession and refused to testify against the two. So the prosecution decided to paint a vivid picture of evil teens who murdered the boys as part of an occult ritual. Vicky Hutchinson's testimony was only used at Jesse's trial. The prosecution used it to build their case against Jesse as corroboration of Jesse's coerced confession. However, by the time Damien and Jason's trial started 2 weeks later, everyone on the jury already knew about her testimony and Jesse's statement. The confession was even included during the jury deliberations. It didn't take long for Damien and Jason to get a guilty verdict. Many celebrities believed that the teenagers were railroaded by the police and the community because they were outcasts. Documentaries were produced that supported their defense. Surprisingly, or not, in 2003, Vicky Hutchinson admitted that her testimony was a complete fabrication. More importantly, she claimed that everything she said was told to her by the West Memphis Police Department detectives. She was also threatened that if she did not testify as instructed, she herself will be implicated in the crime and her son taken away from her. In 2007, the defense was able to force the state to conduct a new round of DNA tests due to the advancements in technology. DNA testing showed that none of the genetic material found at the crime scene could be tied to the three men. Instead, it detected the DNA of a man who couldn't be identified at the time. Later, it was reported that the hair in one of the ligatures used to tie up the boys was consistent with the DNA of Terry Hobbs, Stevie's stepfather. Another hair found on a tree stump near the crime scene was consistent with the DNA of a friend of Hobbs, David Jacoby. However, both men have denied involvement in the murders. More importantly, they have never been arrested or investigated in connection with the case. In 2009, 3 witnesses filed affidavits claiming that they saw Hobbs with the 3 boys the night they disappeared. This contradicted Hobbs's statement to the police. In 2010, a judge allowed the 3 men to obtain a new evidentiary hearing based on this new evidence, which would determine if a new trial was needed. However, in order to get Damien out of death row, the West Memphis Three took an Alford plea. They still maintained their innocence despite the guilty plea. There was a condition attached, though. The 3 signed an agreement not to sue the state for wrongful conviction. Aside from the 2007 DNA test results, leading medical experts also now believe that the mutilation of the bodies of the boys that the police thought to have been caused by knives as part of an occult ritual were more likely to have been caused by animal predation after the boys were murdered. That's not all that happened. Some of the parents of the 3 boys have expressed doubt regarding the guilty verdicts of the West Memphis Three. Christopher Byers' biological father, Rick Murray, is one. Pamela Marie Hobbs, Stevie's mother and Hobbs' ex-wife, called for a reopening of the verdicts and further investigation of the evidence in 2007. In the same year, John Mark Byers also expressed his belief that the 3 are innocent. More importantly, in a defamation lawsuit Terry Hobbs filed against the Dixie Chicks singer Natalie Maines, Pamela Hobbs testified that she found Stevie's knife in Terry's nightstand, a knife that he always took with him. Since the police didn't find it with Stevie, Pamela always thought that the murderer had taken the knife with him. She also claimed that her sister Jolynn saw Hobbs washing clothes, bed linens and curtains from Stevie's room at an odd time around the time of the murders. In 2012, it was revealed that Hobbs's nephew allegedly told his friends that his Uncle Terry had murdered the 3 little boys. One of the witnesses claimed that he overheard his friend's uncle and father talking about the murders. In 2021, the lawyers of the West Memphis Three requested access to evidence from the crime scene. Advancements in DNA technology means that evidence recovered from the crime scene, such as the shoelaces used to tie up the children, can now be tested. This could provide law enforcement clues as to the identity of the person who committed the murders. In a surprising twist, a lot of the evidence that the attorneys of the West Memphis Three wanted to test, including the victim's shoes, socks, shirts, and shoelaces, were either lost, misplaced, or had been destroyed in a fire. Months later, attorney Patrick Benker, who represents Damien, reported that the lost evidence has been found. She was granted access to the West Memphis Police Department by an Arkansas state order. Not only was the evidence intact, she reported that it was quite organized. This discovery occurred just days after the chief of police, Michael Pope, resigned from the department. Whether or not his resignation is related to the discovery of the evidence is up for debate. Unfortunately, in 2022, a judge from Crittenden County denied Damien's request for new DNA testing of the evidence. The reason? He is no longer in prison. However, Arkansas does not limit access to post-conviction DNA testing to those currently incarcerated. Damien's lawyer intends to appeal this decision. The question is, would DNA testing truly solve this decades-old mystery? The chances are very high. There are plenty of evidence that can be tested to both eliminate and identify suspects. While hair found on the shoelaces had been tested and found consistent with Terry Hobbs' DNA, it is also consistent with around 1.5% of the population. The same goes for the DNA found linking David Jacoby to the crime scene. But with advanced DNA technology, the results might be even more definitive. In fact, these are not the only pieces of evidence that needs to be tested. Though most of the public, as well as the police, were focused on the West Memphis Three as the murderers, there were other suspects that surfaced. Two West Memphis teenagers, Chris Morgan and Brian Holland, had suddenly left for Oceanside, California, just 4 days after the bodies were discovered. It was presumed that Morgan was familiar with the children because he had driven an ice cream truck route in their neighborhood. The two teens were arrested by California police, where they were asked to take polygraph tests. The results showed that the two exhibited deception when they denied being involved in the murders. During interrogation, Morgan had reportedly claimed that he might have killed the boys. He had stated that he had a long history of drug and alcohol abuse. He also claimed to experience blackouts and memory lapses. However, he also quickly recanted his statement regarding the murders. The California police collected blood and urine samples from the two teenagers and sent them to the West Memphis Police Department. However, there is no indication that the WMPD followed up on this lead. Morgan's statement was barred from admission as evidence during the trial. If the samples are still available, testing them against the DNA evidence collected at the crime scene could lead to a breakthrough. Another piece of potential evidence that can be tested is the folding hunting knife that John Mark Byers, the adoptive father of victim Christopher Byers, gave to the team working on the Paradise Lost documentary. Blood was found on the knife that matched both Byers and Chris's blood type. Clearly, there is still much doubt about the case of the West Memphis Three. DNA testing results showed that they could not be linked to the crime scene. There was no other physical evidence that tied them to the murders. The fibers presented during the trial that were microscopically similar to a bathrobe and a shirt of two of the suspects does not imply that these were clothes worn by the murderers. More importantly, the West Memphis Three didn't have any motive. They were just victims of community bias and the phenomenon known as satanic panic. The question we now face is this: what would it take to finally solve the West Memphis Three case? A lot of effort. It would require retesting much of the evidence gathered at the crime scene using today's technology. It would also require a lot of footwork on the side of investigators to corroborate the testimonies of the various witnesses that have come forward over the years. The murders might have taken place 20 years ago, but it's never too late for justice to prevail. If you love our content and want to support the channel, feel free to check our web shop where you can find exclusive true crime merch brought to you by Bad Things.